Good morning, everyone. Good morning. And I'm still John Lippincott, president of CASE. Delighted to be here with you all for this closing session of the CASE Summit for Advancement Leaders. We've got a great closing session for you. We had an interesting event this morning. We were in the green room for the speakers, and we were standing around chatting, and there was a table with a tablecloth on it that had coffee and tea, and the tablecloth started to move, and out crawled a guy who said, "Oh, excuse me, I just woke up," and walked out of the room.
And he paid his registration fee.
That's right, he did not have his CASE name tag on either.
You hope he did.
That's right. So I am going to ask all of our speakers to please check under your chairs to make sure we don't have any more surprises today. It was bizarre. At any rate, we do have three very distinguished and unflappable speakers with us today. Three college and university presidents who are here to talk with us about the immediate and long-term impact of the economic downturn on higher education. Before I introduce them, I do want to thank again Blackbaud, which is sponsoring this session. Blackbaud is a leading global provider of software and related services specifically designed for nonprofit organizations. So would you please join me in thanking our friends at Blackbaud. Now I would like to introduce our panelists, and with their permission I'm going to use their first names, and with their indulgence I'm going to keep my introductions relatively brief because it would take this entire session were I to go through the bios of these three very distinguished individuals. You can also read more in your programs or wait for the movie to come out about each of their lives. Our first panelist is Gene Block, Chancellor of the University of California, Los Angeles since August 2007. In addition to serving as UCLA's CEO, he holds faculty appointments in psychiatry, biobehavioral sciences, and physiological science, and heads a research laboratory funded by the National Institutes of Health. Prior to joining UCLA, Gene served as vice president and provost at the University of Virginia. He's a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and has published more than 100 scientific papers, chapters, and reviews. His academic specialization, circadian biology, deals with the functioning of 24-hour rhythms in higher organisms. There will be no sleeping in this class in front of Professor Block. An inventor of numerous devices, he holds a patent for a respiratory monitor to prevent sudden infant death syndrome. Gene received his master's and doctoral degrees in psychology from the University of Oregon and a bachelor's degree in psychology from Stanford, where he also held a postdoctoral fellowship. Would you please join me in welcoming immediately to my right, Gene Block. Our second panelist on my far right is Dick Celeste, who became the 12th president of Colorado College in 2002. Prior to joining the college, Dick served as U.S. Ambassador to India under President Clinton. His public service experience also includes 2 terms as Governor of Ohio, as Director of the United States Peace Corps, and as Lieutenant Governor of Ohio. Equally at ease in the private sector, Dick was a managing partner of an economic development consultancy. He is a Rhodes Scholar and Yale graduate, and has taught urban economics at John Carroll University and served as a visiting fellow in public policy at Case Western. He currently serves as the chair of the board of the Health Effects Institute in Boston. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and a lifetime National Associate of the National Academies. He's also a board member of the National Association of Independent Colleges and Universities and an advisory board member of the Institute of International Education. Please join me in welcoming Dick Celeste. And our third panelist is Anne McGee, I think you can figure out which one is Ann McGee. Ann has served as president of Seminole Community College since 1996. Prior to assuming the Seminole presidency, she was vice president for development and executive director of the foundation at Broward College. She also served as Broward's provost and was dean of students and on the faculty at Florida Keys Community College. Ann serves on the executive committee of the American Association of Community Colleges President's Academy, where she's off to, I think, immediately after this meeting, as well as the steering committee for Florida's Community College President's Council. She's a member of the Case Board of Trustees, where she is a very strong champion for community college advancement. In 2006, Ann was named top community college CEO in the nation by the Association of Community College Trustees. She's a graduate of St. Petersburg College, Florida State University, and Nova Southeastern. She recently completed an 8-year term as a charter trustee at Florida State. Please welcome Ann McGee. Before we begin our conversation, and we do want this to be a conversation in which we will engage you as well, so please be thinking about questions you have for our panelists. But let me offer just a few comments to set the stage. I don't need to tell anyone in this room that this has been a challenging year for American higher education. Public institutions have been dealing with severe state budget cuts, private institutions with plummeting endowment values. We'll talk in more detail about those financial strains in a few moments. But what strikes me about the impact of the current recession on higher education is that it seems to have caused more soul-searching than we have seen in previous recessions. There was a recent opinion piece in the Chronicle of Higher Education, you may have seen it, that asked, is it possible that higher education might be the next bubble to burst? The article then went on, or the commentary then went on to answer its own question and to say some early warnings suggest that it could be. There was the recent question posed by the head of the Association of American Universities, AAU, about whether or not we might need fewer research universities in this country. There are the recent news stories about community colleges founded on a mission of open access having to turn away students. And there are increasing numbers of four-year private colleges that have had to abandon their mission entirely, either closing their doors or merging with other institutions. So there are signs that colleges and universities are indeed under significant stress. And while stress testing American higher education is certainly different from stress testing a bank or a cardiology patient, I would suggest that the stakes may be just as high. And that's why we felt this would be a good topic to explore at this closing session with our distinguished panelists. So let's go on and do just that. And for my first question, I'd like to begin with asking our panelists for their assessment of just how much stress American higher education is experiencing. You may have seen the U.S. Department of Education recently released a report indicating that 114 colleges were in such fragile financial condition at the end of their last fiscal year that they failed the department's financial responsibility test. I should note that UCLA, Seminole Community College, and Colorado College were not on that list. But Dick, virtually all of the 114 on the list were private institutions. Should we be alarmed by that number? Should we expect that number to grow in the years ahead? And should we expect to see more campus closures and mergers as a result?
Yes, yes, and yes. I think that we don't know. They were studying private institutions who receive federal financial aid. We don't really know how large that universe is, but it is a growing number, and I believe it will continue to grow. Some of the data, I'm sure, for some of those institutions was probably from the 2007 fiscal year, and so next year's information is likely to be more bleak. But the story in the Chronicle that described this federal report pointed out, and I think pointed out accurately, that every private institution is a little bit different when you look at their finances. And so I would say in some cases, some of these 114 institutions are likely not to make it. And to move into that category of schools that either shut their doors or are acquired by a proprietary institution or merge in some other fashion. And I would not be surprised to see that be a trend over the next several years. I don't think, you mentioned that our institutions weren't a part of that watch list, if you will. I don't believe that this is the case for the high-performing private institutions of higher education. We all face challenges, but not as severe as those that are on this watch list.
And so is there an element of this that perhaps, I don't know if healthy is the right word, but an element of this that is the playing out somewhat of a natural business cycle, that institutions that are not performing effectively in the marketplace are simply being weeded out of the marketplace?
I think there is something to that. You asked, or the question was posed in the Chronicle op-ed about higher education being a bubble. One of the ways in which you avoid a bubble is to let the air out from time to time. Mm-hmm. And that can be happening here. I mean, institutions that are desperate to achieve enrollment will discount to the point of endangering themselves, for example, and create competition for sister institutions that may put them in jeopardy down the line. So I don't think this is the worst thing to happen to higher education in the United States if there is some culling of our institutions, whether it's in the public sector or the private sector. It's certainly going to happen in the private sector.
Your reference to some struggling for enrollment leads me to want to talk with Ann a little bit about community colleges, which are not struggling for enrollment, at least certainly not Seminole. The conventional wisdom, indeed, is that community colleges are counter-cyclical, and so they benefit from a down economy. And while that may be true from the standpoint of enrollment, I can't imagine that community colleges aren't feeling some negative effects of the recession that we're experiencing. So I'd like your sense, Ann, of how profound those negative effects are likely to be for community colleges and how they're going to manifest themselves, since they're not manifesting themselves as enrollment declines. And are there, despite the enrollment pressures, perhaps even some community colleges that may have difficulty in this economic environment and have to consider their own survival?
I think first the baseline I want to establish is community colleges are enrolling nearly half the students that are in higher education in the United States. And if you wondered if the economy was softening, it was when I saw our enrollment pattern go from being no growth, totally flat, to starting to tick up to now 7 terms of double-digit enrollment increases at Seminole, including 18% in the spring, 30% this summer, and my applications are running 50% ahead for next year. We're 32,000 students at Seminole. We're one of 28 community colleges in Florida and growing. I think the stress we're feeling, John said we're counter-cyclical, and we are. When the economy is good, people work. They don't go to community colleges. When the economy is bad, they come to their local community colleges for either training or retraining. In Florida, since most of our money used to come from the state, we're now at about 50% instead of 75% from the state. The state used to say when the economy was good, well, you're not growing, so we're not going to give you any more money. And now they're saying, well, you're growing, we want to reward you, but there's no money to give you. So it really is a catch-22 for us. I think the major stress on community colleges right now is how to deal with that enrollment increase that we know is coming and not shutting that open door that we've always been so proud of, that access point. In Florida, 80% of the minorities that are enrolled in higher education are in community colleges. We are the access point. And so I think what you're seeing us do is, yes, we're using more part-time faculty. And I'd say one of the stressors would be I want to hire more full-time faculty. I want them to have the relationship with those students. We've always prided ourselves on being very personal in our approach as a community college, and I came out of a community college, so I know how important that is. I started at St. Pete when I was 16 years of age, coming out of high school, and my dad said, "You're not going to Duke. There's two reasons. There's no money, and you're 16. You're going to the local community college." And it was the last place I wanted to be, because that was where the losers went. That was the last, and that it was the best place for me. I got a great education, but that whole dynamic has changed, and now you're finding students are choosing community colleges. We are the first choice because it's smaller classes, it's a faculty member who teaches 5 classes a term. So I think the major stress for us is how to keep up with that enrollment growth and put well-qualified faculty in front of the students. Not saying that adjuncts aren't, and many of you may be adjuncts, but I think students would rather have somebody available to them all during the week as opposed to just somebody who's coming in one night a week and leaving. So that's the major stressor.
Jean, we were chatting in the in the green room. When I was drafting these remarks, I had noted that UCLA was facing a $50 million budget shortfall, but we were chatting, and I think it's now 130 or something on that order. Hard to keep up with the budget shortfall that you're facing at UCLA, and as I understand it, you're expecting that figure could grow in terms of the shortfall. So what I'd be interested in your sharing with us is how that kind of budget gap can be sustainable for an institution, or is it sustainable for an institution like UCLA, and what do such substantial shortfalls mean for less well-resourced public institutions? Obviously, UCLA has a great deal going for it and has perhaps some capacity to absorb that shortfall, but I imagine there are other public institutions with less capacity to absorb that.
Yes, that's certainly true. The UC system, and you may have read this in the news in the last few days, is expected to take about an $800 million reduction in its budget, or a spectacular decrease in its budget. That's been passed along and proportionally to us at about $117 million plus about $14 million that we had to defer from last year. It's about a $130 million cut this year on a budget from the state, which is about $800 million, and an overall budget of about $4.1 billion. So a very large overall budget, but a lot of that is the health system. So this represents a very significant cut, and already we've seen a reduction in our workforce of about 400 people. So, and that is everything from yearly lecturers to faculty who've retired and not been replaced, to staff in our academic departments and, of course, in our administrative units. The cuts will have to go much deeper. We estimate there'll have to be a $100 million permanent cut in the budget to UCLA in the future, because the state is not going to come back to the table for some time. So it is going to be a struggle. We've asked our deans and our vice chancellors to set their highest priorities and determine what actually we can shed. The problem is, like many of these large universities, we have many functions to serve. We are an enormous healthcare provider for Los Angeles. We play a role, an outreach role in the community, which is essential if we want to maintain diversity of our students and our workforce, as well as providing education to a very large number of students, approximately 38,000 students. So what will happen? Well, we will sustain it. We will have to sustain it. We will become a smaller institution. So we're over-enrolled by almost 2,000 students. We'll have to reduce our over-enrollment, come back to a size that we can manage, and probably UCLA will be 10 to 20% smaller in terms of its overall academic program. So.
And you had pointed out to me, which I found interesting, when you say over-enrollment, essentially those 2,000 students are students that the state does not pay for.
That's right. So we're approximately 1,900 students, or we receive no support from the state. We've actually absorbed them. And it's important to us because these students are outstanding and we love to have them. We have triples. Most of our living units are now 3 to a room, but the students seem to be dealing with that. But we will have to reduce the number of students. And that's painful because many of the gains that we've made, the gains in diversity, we've been helped by larger classes, and it'll be harder to do all that with smaller classes, so I do worry about it. As far as other institutions, I know in California that are less well-resourced or not as diversified in their sources of support, it's going to be even a larger challenge. So I share your concern that institutions that don't have other types of resources are going to be greatly challenged to maintain their level of activity. So it's a concern for every institution, though.
And you know, you touched on something that I think I'd just like to highlight, and that is, we think in terms of these budget cuts as kind of the damage they're doing to the institution, but I'm struck by your comment about the damage it does to access, particularly for diverse populations, to higher education, and that there is potentially a real tragedy in that aspect.
Absolutely. You know, we do an enormous amount of work with high schools throughout Los Angeles, especially the inner city schools that need assistance, and those programs are expensive. They're high-touch programs, and they're successful. We get remarkable students from Los Angeles that we couldn't get without investment actually in K through 12. Those are all going to be challenged, I think, with budget cuts that are coming.
Well, there seems to be at least unanimity that there are significant financial strains facing institutions of all types. Let's talk about some of the causes of those strains, and let's begin on the expense side, the cost side. And Ann, I'd be interested in your talking about when you look at Seminole's operating expenses, what puts the most pressure on your budget? What are your fastest rising costs currently, and what are they likely to be in the next couple of years? What's putting that expense pressure?
We're seeing more of our money obviously go into salaries, and so healthcare. Healthcare has just continued to escalate, and we've chosen not to push any of that cost off to our employees. So we cover their full dental, vision, healthcare. That may have to change as we go forward. And fortunately, I'm not unionized, so I don't have to fight that battle. But the healthcare costs, technology has actually helped us. We've put in a chiller plant, we've opened 3 new sites, so that significantly helped to decrease the costs that we're spending on utilities, and we've been able to move some of that money over to cover some of the other things like healthcare costs.
And is healthcare costs something that's negotiated by each separate community college?
Good question, John. In Florida, we have a consortium, and 22 of the 28 community colleges have chosen to go into the consortium, and we do all of our insurances together, our health insurance, liability, and that's been a huge savings to us.
Or at least has slowed the rate of growth, if not savings. Gene, I'm wondering if we in higher education have done a good enough job in terms of controlling costs in the good times now that we're facing the difficult times. Some have accused us of simply turning to the taxpayer and the tuition payer whenever we need more money and not taking serious steps toward reducing our expenses. I just wonder from your perspective if there's any truth to that viewpoint and what we might be needing to do in that regard.
Yeah, so I would certainly agree that you know, in peacetime, when things are going well, you tend to accrete programs. Everything tends to get larger, and there is some trimming, just like with corporations. There's some trimming that can go on at universities, and there are sacred cows that have to be dealt with. That I think this forces us to really focus on what's our core mission and how to become more efficient, and we can become more efficient. So I certainly would agree that there has been some growth in programs, but not even programs. If you look at the majors, for example, I remember watching my own major in the biology department grow at the University of Virginia, where courses get added on. And we have to ask ourselves, you know, have we made, for example, the majors a bit too long, and that by shortening majors in some areas, by shortening the disciplinary requirements, we could allow students to take more lower division classes and move our faculty around a bit. There's a lot of efficiencies that can be obtained when you have to think hard about this. So the one good thing about this crisis, I think, to focus our minds a bit about what's most important. So I agree we can probably squeeze some efficiencies out. But the cuts that we're talking about, I have to emphasize, are so deep that you cut into bone. This isn't cutting fat. This is cutting fat, certainly, but muscle and bone, and that's the problem.
And it's happening so rapidly that it's difficult to plan thoughtfully about where to make to achieve those efficiencies.
That's right. And in fact, for most institutions, the cuts have to come in 2 forms. There has to be this acute action, which is really pretty devastating, where you simply have to cut the budget, and you have to cut it where you can cut it quickly. And then it takes time actually for more reasoned action when you can bring your faculties together, your leadership, and shared governance to actually decide how programs can be consolidated and closed in some cases. So it's going to be a very involved, really two-step process.
Dick, those who do find fault with our inability to seem to keep costs under control often point to the trend to provide expensive campus amenities. Hot tubs and climbing walls seem to be the examples that are frequently cited. And I wonder if you think those amenities have in fact been a significant driver of costs, and if you think the competition to provide first-class facilities will increase or decrease in this current environment.
John, for us, our climbing wall is the Garden of the Gods Park, and our spa is Manitou Springs. I think it's true that for the more expensive, very selective, small residential liberal arts colleges, there has been a huge investment made over the past decade in facilities like health and fitness centers. Really, climbing walls are a shorthand for that, but there's performing arts centers. We have a new performing arts center on our campus. Part of that is driven by changes in curriculum, for example, much more collaborative teaching in the arts, so that the old place where you'd have music and then over here drama and over here dance and here film, now there's a desire to want to be together and to try to find a way to accommodate that. But I don't, at least in terms of the private liberal arts colleges, I don't think that amenities are the principal drivers of cost. I think it's been faculty salaries and the desire to maintain a very favorable student-faculty ratio, keeping class sizes small, which goes with that. I think it's been financial aid and the desire to put more money into financial aid to enhance diversity, to meet need. And finally, undergraduate research. I mean, Gene knows the cost of research in a large research, and the university has a large research capabilities. And liberal arts colleges, 40% of our students are natural science majors. Mm-hmm. And we have to have in our chemistry labs or biology or physics equipment that is, while it's not the same as what you would find in an R1 institution, it's significant. Our younger faculty require it. And so funding and sustaining both the equipment and the opportunities for faculty research that engages students becomes a major, major pressure for many of these very selective institutions. And so I think perhaps when we're going out and looking for resources, we look for somebody who wants their name on a climbing wall.
Yeah.
And it may be harder to make the pitch for an equipment pool, endow an equipment pool for our biology and our chemistry departments. But I see those, faculty salary, small classes, financial aid, and research as the things that over the last 3 or 4 years have been the most debated for us in terms of expenditures.
Which is, it's good to hear that you're really seeing the drivers of cost being mission critical and not this marginal stuff that people like to point to. Well, even as...
I should probably
please
add, though, it is true that this generation of college students comes with different expectations. If they're going to come on a residential campus, they want a dorm room. I just went back to my 50th college reunion. They want a dorm room that is very different from the one that I lived in 50 years ago. And they expect support, for example, in the technology side that we didn't even imagine what it might be 50 years ago. So there have been some places where this change is real. Expectations are higher, and particularly around technology, the cost is a constant cost because you have to stay within reasonable shooting distance of state-of-the-art.
Well, frankly, I hope your dorm room from 50 years ago is different than it was 50 years ago.
They wouldn't let me in.
I would now.
So we've got costs placing this upside pressure on university budgets. We've got revenues placing downside stress on budgets. So let's talk a little bit about revenue trends. And Gene, I want to come back to you. I think it's fair to say that state funding levels have contributed to that downside stress. We've talked about the drop in state funding, and probably these figures have changed since I jotted down my notes, but 30 years ago, UCLA was getting 37% of its budget from the state. Today, we're talking 15%, something on that order. You probably, well, you saw an even more precipitous drop in the percentage of state funding that was supporting the University of Virginia, where some of you will recall in the last year or so, the trend line for support coming from private giving and a payout from endowment actually crossed over the percentage that was coming from the state. Where are we headed in terms of state support for public higher education? Are we going to continue to see a downward trend? You seem to suggest that that $100 million is probably permanently gone, that you're not banking on it coming back either in real dollars or IOUs. So are we going to see, when the economy ticks back up, are we going to see some positive improvements, or are we going to see that we've kind of reached a floor from which we don't recover?
I think if you look over the last 10 or 15 years, I mean, the message is pretty clear. It's going down, steadily going down. I think two things are happening. One thing, I think there is a changing perception of higher education being a private as opposed to a public good. So there is, I think, among the population in the U.S. A feeling they're looking more towards parents and philanthropy to support higher education. I think that's a component. The other component is the enormous increasing cost that states are facing for health care, penal system in California. If you look at just the cost of prisons in California, it's pretty much eaten up all the increases that should have gone to universities, and that's appalling. As I always say, that I've never seen a drive-by caused by an engineer, drive-by shooting, and there's a good reason to educate people and give people opportunities. So it is, I think there are aspects of the state budget that guarantee that strong support for higher education I just don't think is going to return. So I think we're going to become, in many ways, privately funded public. So public in our DNA, the public institutions have a very special place to play in terms of access to students, in terms of what we do in our communities, our engagement with our communities. So public in our DNA, but really private in our funding model. And I think that's here to stay.
Yeah, and certainly that seemed to be a very similar message to what John Castine talks about at University of Virginia, of being of maintaining that public mission, even though not maintaining the public funding.
That's right. I think the wake-up call came early, and I think it was probably in the 1990s, in the first downturn, when the Board of Visitors and the president decided that it was going to be necessary to build up an endowment sufficiently large to act as a buffer so that the next time the state withdrew resources, the university would not be placed in the position it was in the 1990s. I was there as provost in 2001 when a downturn occurred again, and I must say having a larger endowment made a difference. Mm-hmm. We were able to use endowment income to buffer some of the problems with state support. That said, I think the general trend still is down, and we're going to have to look probably to higher fees for our students and really enhance philanthropy to make up the difference. I just don't see that reversing.
Well, speaking of endowments, that probably leads to some discussion about what's going on with private institutions, which are much more heavily endowment dependent. In fact, the Delta Project report that came out at the beginning of this year indicated that on average 40% of the budget for a private baccalaureate institution is coming from current gifts and payout on endowment. Moody's Investor Service recently issued a report on private colleges suggesting that they are only now starting to feel the pinch and warning that a sharp deterioration in revenues is expected in 2009. Dick, I'm wondering if you would agree with that Moody's analysis that the worst is yet to come for private institutional revenues.
I think I would agree with it. I'm not sure that I agree with the 40% endowment dependent. It may be true for Harvard and Yale and Princeton and places like that. Certainly for the smaller liberal arts colleges. I mean, Colorado College, it would be more in the order of 23 or 24%. And I think that's probably more typical of the reasonably well-endowed small liberal arts colleges. Nevertheless, that said, we calculate endowment payout on a trailing average, 12-quarter trailing average, so we look back 3 years. What that means is that the impact of last year really is going to be coming over a 3-year period. And in all of our budget planning, we're assuming that we're going to be down by at least 10% in that portion of revenue generated by our endowment, regardless of what happens in terms of endowment performance. That's already built in because of the drops of this past year. So our budget strategy is built around a serious impact that continues for at least 3 years. The economy can recover. We wouldn't begin to benefit from that recovery till at least 3 years down the road as far as endowment payout. So I think institutions that count on endowment for a significant portion of their operating expense are going to have to work with the assumption that it's certainly not going to get better, and it could be worse in the next several years. In our case, we made the assumption that we had to reduce 10% this current year. So we took, I mean, just to pick up on something Gene said, we're a much smaller place. We have 2,000 students, nothing like 38,000 students, 550 full-time staff. We reduced our staff we eliminated 60 positions, so over 10% of our positions, most through voluntary separation, just a handful of layoffs. But we eliminated football and 2 other sports as well, which is not easily done. And the interesting thing to all of you who raise money, I mean, Steve Elder can tell you that it was not a picnic talking to our football alums, but the majority of parents and major contributors who responded were extremely positive. And we literally had people voluntarily write checks saying, we appreciate the fact that you have affirmed the priority commitment to the academic experience of our young people. And so I think that even when you're doing these cuts, I mean, it's essential that they be mission focused.
Yeah.
And can I pick up on that? Because community colleges don't have huge endowments to fall back on. The beginning of our legislative session, we were looking at a 15% cut across the board to all of higher ed in Florida, and really all of K-12. And the legislature realized that we're the training engines, and that's where the students were going, were to the community colleges, and if they were going to get the economy back on track, they best not cut the budgets to community colleges. And so we wound up at the end of the session pretty even, but pushing off more of the cost to the student. So the universities are going to go up 15% a year in their tuition. Community colleges have a base of 8% with another 5% we can add on to it. So I'll be going up 13%, which pushes more of that cost off to the students who many times are the ones who can not afford it because they're working 1 or 2 jobs to be a part-time student or even to be a full-time student at the community college. So as we were trying to plan for this potential 15% budget cut, we started about a 3-month discussion with the faculty and with the staff and with our students. How should we do this? And we knew we wanted to continue to take students. We didn't want to close that open door. So my average class size is 23, which to me doesn't seem really high compared to what I see some of the universities doing. Asking the faculty to add 2 more students in each of their classes, which would save us a lot of money, take more students. The faculty came back and said, you've got 5 athletic programs. Don't expect us to take more students if you're not going to do anything about the athletic program. And when you look at the cost, 24 basketball students, primarily from out of the region, men's and women's basketball, $300,000. I need $400,000 to pay nursing faculty. It was a pretty easy sell, but I knew that if I didn't do something with the athletic programs, and it's not easy to close athletic programs, that I wasn't going to get the faculty on board for doing the kinds of things we needed to do at the institution. So, you know, we've cut 25 positions, we've closed some programs, we did away with 2 sports, but I think we're just truing. We're going back to, as Gene said, that core mission. Student success, student learning, and trying to really focus our resources on those as we go forward.
Dick, could I come back to you? You were talking about how you were budgeting in relation to the endowment payout. If I understood you correctly, you've decided to maintain your established payout rate, that you're not changing your payout policy.
Well, we're not changing our payout policy. But let me say the board will debate the payout, the investment committee of the board debates the payout policy about once a year.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to keep it on essentially the same track. We have a collar on it, so if that payout percentage would reduce the payout from year to year more than 10%, we would still take, we cap the reduction or hold the reduction at 10%. And we're assuming that doing that is going to mean that we have to hold it at 10% for longer in order to protect, in the end, the corpus of the endowment.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to pick up on something that Gene said. Having been a governor, I've cared a lot about public higher education and community colleges. And I think the biggest deficit in this country today is an understanding and appreciation that higher education is a public good, period. And to me, the irony is this pushing down of public support for the public institutions and a failure to understand that private institutions are also serving this public good. I have a higher percentage of Pell Grant recipients at CC than several in-state public institutions. And one of the things that's happening today, it seems to me, is to the degree that there's still a commitment of public resources, and I think this is true of the Obama administration, those public investments are being made more toward the students than they are toward the institutions. So rather than money that's going to come directly to UCLA or to Seminole Community College or to Colorado College, it will come in the form of enhanced Pell Grants or other opportunities for student aid, or perhaps around focused research. And that's where the sense of public good is expressed. And I think that somehow we have to reinforce the understanding that our nation is only going to succeed in a global competition if we not only sustain what we've had, but advance it further. I mean, our higher education has been the envy of people around the world, and that is one of the things that is in jeopardy right now as we sit here.
And I'd be interested in sticking with this conversation a bit, because I wonder why, or if you have a perspective on why we lost that part of the debate. Or maybe we didn't lose it, but that it became de-emphasized. And I'll even speculate that maybe we contributed to it by placing a great deal of emphasis on the earning power of our graduates, what they gain individually and personally, which was an important argument to make. It was made in good faith, and it was an important selling point for higher education, but we were selling it on the basis of individual good. And I wonder if there were other factors that may have contributed to the fact that we're not, that the public good argument does not seem to be resonating with the public at large.
I don't think there's a simple answer to that. There have been great champions for higher education throughout the history of this country. And one looks back to what happened post-Civil War with the creation of the land-grant institutions, which was a vividly imagined breakthrough in higher education. There wasn't a precedent for it in Germany or France. And it became a very distinctive aspect of our public higher education. Then there was, I think, the remarkable post-World War II envisioning, on the one hand, with the opportunity for veterans to come home and have their education paid for, which is a huge access commitment, and on the other hand, with Vannevar Bush's conception of the research institutions and the fact that in our country, public research is principally done through higher education, whereas in Europe or in India, places like this, it's done through government research centers. And so there's another remarkable thing. Throughout our history, this little thing called liberal arts, these small colleges, were quite distinctive things plucked down all across our landscape and created by denominations and others. Each of these were almost totally different from anything else happening in higher education around the globe, and each had powerful voices speaking for it. But somehow, I think in the era of the plenty of the last 20 years, there hasn't been a voice, and I think all of us have sort of hoped that President Obama and the people he's brought around him could somehow help articulate this for our society, because I think leadership at the highest level is really essential. And here's a president himself, his wife, his vice president, the vice president's wife, all products of really terrific higher education, and they earned it. They didn't get carried by somebody who was taking care of their papers for them or whatever. I don't know what was going on at Yale when my erstwhile college mate was there. Somehow we let the country down, I think. So I mean, I think it's, I guess all of us, I feel right now, I have to find a way to spend at least a bit of my time articulating in a state like Colorado, which doesn't have a sufficient appreciation for what higher education means, either in public or private higher education. Why this is essential for the public welfare. It's not just because somebody's going to earn more money, but because we're all better as a society.
Yeah. And I appreciate that perspective, and Gene, I'd like yours as well, but I appreciate that perspective that one of the factors has been the lack of champions or the lack of leadership at the highest levels in terms of articulating that public good. Gene?
And sort of following along with what Dick said is that, I think Sputnik, for example, was an enormous stimulus and a wake-up call to many citizens that, in fact, if you didn't invest in that case in science and technology, you could fall behind. And those of us, and many of you have been to China recently, and you see the investment in education, which is just staggering. The growth in campuses there and facilities, which now rival ours, many of the facilities. There'll be another wake-up call. You're going to wake up one morning and watch Chinese, astronauts walking on the moon and doing things that we're going to recognize that we have fallen behind. And it's because we haven't invested in education. So somehow there has to be this wake-up call that, in fact, making certain that everyone in this country has an opportunity to obtain a higher education and can afford it is critical. But it sometimes takes something pretty jarring, actually, to wake up the public and recognize what they have not been doing.
But look at what we pay our professional athletes versus what we pay faculty, and. I had somebody,
coaches versus what we pay our faculty.
Yeah, I had somebody explain to me this week, I'm not going into teaching because I can't make enough money to support my family in teaching. Right. And so until I think we change that whole equation and get the best and the brightest going into teaching.
And I also want to come back to our discussion about the economic climate and its effects on institutions, and particularly what you're finding in terms of corporate partnerships and corporate support with Seminole or as a funding source for community colleges. You've got a very active partnership program through your Center for Economic Development. Are you sensing in this economic environment that partnership is losing some of its steam or gaining steam from the recession?
Seminole is a real mix of vocational technical programs, the AA transfer programs, and now we're starting our own baccalaureate. So we're actually going 4 years. So we're all across the gamut, including an adult high school. And what we've found is we train the automotive professional workers. So the automotive industry built a training building for us. We train the construction trades folks, and so they came in and they built a construction trades building for us. The hospitals know they need nurses. I'm the one that's going to produce most of the nurses for them. They're paying for those faculty lines for us. So we've found that the support has continued to be strong because it's very self-serving on their part. They need the workers. They know the workers are going to come out of the local community college. I think what you're going to see with the Obama administration, this next week there's supposed to be a huge announcement about an infusion or the proposal of an infusion of billions into community colleges, both for construction and also renovation because our facilities are getting older, but also for specific training programs because we can do shorter training programs, get people back into the workforce or into needed professions. So we haven't seen, we've seen some donors restructure gifts. We've seen some of the hospitals say, I won't sign a 3-year note with you, but you've got our commitment for 3 years because they know they need the workers and they know the workers are coming out of community colleges.
Now, you mentioned that 2 of those centers, one was automobile industry related and the other was home building industry related.
No, construction, not home building,
okay.
construction.
Okay, construction.
Construction, which is all across the board. And obviously the automotive industry has taken a hit, so we're now restructuring that program into shorter training pieces for them as well. So I think what it's doing is it's challenging us to look at the curriculum and see, how can we be very nimble in how we rework the curriculum to make it really responsive to what our community needs are.
If I could just make a comment again on what Anna said, is that I think that community colleges actually are an integral part actually of a changing equation and will play a larger and larger role actually in education. Currently, 40% of UCLA's third-year students are transfer students, largely from community colleges, and this sort of seamless transition. Many students do that for economic reasons. Many students do that because that's the chance for them to level the playing field coming out of poorly prepared high school environments. And I just think that, again, we have to really think through community colleges being an integral part of our four-year educational program, because they're going to play, I think, for many students, as the cost of education goes up, a larger and larger role. So again, I'm happy to hear the support will be rebuilding your infrastructure is critical. So.
We've touched on another key source of revenue in some of your comments, but I'd like to take a little bit harder look at the question of tuition. Just as the economic downturn is testing university budgets, it's testing family budgets. And those family budgets were already being tested by tuition levels that over the last 25 years grew at 4 times the rate of inflation, according to the National Center for Public Policy and Higher Education. Dick, is there a real danger here that some institutions are pricing themselves out of the market, especially in this climate? Are we testing the limits of price elasticity? Will more students be making their college choices based, at least in part, on price, whether it's sticker price or net price?
I think there's a great deal of concern on the part of my colleagues we have a group called the Annapolis Group, which is probably 90 presidents of highly selective, small highly selective residential liberal arts colleges who tend to be the $35,000 to now $55,000 tuitions, tuitions all-in costs, I should say, not tuitions, fortunately. And talking to President Sarah Lawrence, which this past year won the title for the highest all-in cost, I think maybe it was $53,000, the challenges that they face on campus. I think we have to be very, very concerned about an assumption that we can simply raise our tuition by 4 or 5% a year, whatever it may be, regardless of what's happening in the larger economy, and that the value is evident to our potential customers. I think that students this past year were very likely to look at, they may have applied to Colorado College and to Grinnell and to Carleton, but they probably also applied to the University of Wisconsin and to the University of Minnesota if they came from the Twin Cities, or if they came from Southern California, they may have applied to UCLA, and they are going to look at the cost of those 2 places. Part of our problem is we have never had a very persuasive way of describing cost, price, and cost to customer. Right. So it costs us at Colorado College about $75,000 to educate one student. That's what it costs us. That's what we invest in their education. The sticker price, tuition, room, board, books, travel, which is how we would figure total cost of tuition for this current freshman class, will be about $49,000. So somebody who's paying full tuition and the full tuition part of that, maybe $36,000, is paying about half of the total cost. Then when you consider financial aid, they're, first place, 20% of our students are paying that, they're coming virtually free. How do you say to this potential student who's a sophomore or junior in high school, look, it doesn't matter about your financial circumstances. You can consider an education at Colorado College as accessible to you. That they look at that price tag, their family looks at that price tag, and there's no way I'm going to qualify for it. So we have to figure out thoughtful ways, and a lot of this involves working with college counselors and others to say, look, the first thing you want to be doing is to calculate what are the opportunities for financial aid for you and your family. And hopefully if the president simplifies FAFSA and some of these procedures, there'll be a reasonably simple way for them to put up kind of a yardstick and say, this is what I can do, and then carry that through the system. Because this is critically important as pressure on tuition at any level grows.
Well, and relatively low tuition levels, I saw you smiling as Dick was citing some of the numbers, appear to be very attractive to students and their families in this climate. But I'm wondering the degree to which this is looking at that price in that way is a good thing, because as we all know, and as Dick was just pointing out, in higher education we have this very odd business model where we charge less for our service than it costs us to provide it. And of course, to paraphrase the old joke, if community colleges are losing money on each student, can they really make it up in volume? Is this business model sustainable, especially during a recession where it's costing us more to educate a student than the student is capable of paying?
Well, Florida is one of the lowest tuition states in the nation. And several years ago when the study came out about affordability in higher education, if you remember the rankings, Florida got an F for affordability. And that was calculated based on the percentage of family income that would have to go to afford the education. So even though we've got low tuition, although it's creeping up, if I'm going to go up 13%, the universities are going to go up 15%, it still is closing out those high-need students. And that, I think, is one of the basic issues we haven't dealt with. I really hope they simplify the FAFSA. We have got to find a way to get more students who are high-need, but high-talent students, into our institutions, whether it's $55,000 a year, which just blows my mind, or $100 a credit hour, which is where I am. Mm-hmm. It's still an affordability index for the family. And I know I'm seeing some of the local institutions, University of Central Florida, their enrollment's ticking up even though it's going up 15% a year. Rollins is finding that their apps are off for the fall, which is significant as a private. And I think you're going to see a huge shift over the next couple of years as families realize they cannot afford and students start going more for community colleges, lower priced universities as opposed to the private institutions. So you've got to find a way to get that word out that financial aid, the endowments, the money is there for them. So in our case, what I don't want to see happen is our tuition goes so high that the high need students can't get in and can't access it. And Florida has had a habit of putting more money into merit aid with our Bright Futures program, which they just this year now have decoupled tuition from Bright Futures. Then that will help. They're going to start to lock in that program, so hopefully we can put more aid into need-based.
Dick, you were going to follow up.
I was going to say, Dick, you know, there are two consequences, but one of the consequences, I think they're going to shop for cost versus perceived value. And that will be real. And we're seeing it even with some of our students where the family circumstances change. They're home this summer. They look at mom and dad who really want them to finish CC. We would make up the difference if they came and talked to us. But, you know, they also want to be closer to home. So they're going to go to my kid from Oklahoma City who has said, I'm going to go to the University of Oklahoma and finish up there because it's closer to home. I think this is also the case with high-need students. Typically, high-need students don't go far from home anyhow. But if they come to a place like CC, which recruits nationally and has young people from all over the country, it is more of a challenge when they're facing this kind of stress. So I think that an institution like UCLA is probably going to see more demand at a time when it's harder to serve that demand, because people want to stay close to home and not go from LA to the Rocky Mountains or to Grinnell, Iowa, or to wherever it is.
Well, you're going to see more demand for places. You're also going to see more demand for financial aid so the students can in fact attend UCLA, even at prices that are perhaps sticker prices that are perhaps lower than at Colorado College. So let's talk a little bit, Gene, about financial aid, because you've got, I think I read that a third of the fees that you charge to students is put back into student financial aid, and it is a model of basically asking those students who are paying full freight to subsidize the students who are unable to pay the full freight. And I just wonder if you have any concerns about that model, and whether we might not only be testing some financial limits of people to pay that full freight so that you can subsidize those who can't, but are there some political or even ethical issues at play here as you look at that financing model?
So the UCLA does face a challenge. We have an enormously economically diverse student body. I think we have 36% of our students or 38% on Pell Grants, which for AAU institutions, I think we're at the very top, and I think Berkeley's second. So the California institutions have historically been very, have really taken students, many first generation students, 30% first generation in their families to go to college. So that's great. That warms our heart. I mean, we're doing the right thing. But that means that approximately 2/3 of our students are on some form of financial aid. So you're looking at 1/3 of the students who really are in a position to be able to can fully pay fees to cover the cost of 2/3. You can only do this so far. I mean, you can only raise the cost of education for the students that are paying the full fare so much. There is an issue. I don't know if it's an ethical issue, but it's certainly an issue that practically we recognize. And part of the solution is, again, more philanthropy, more student support, actually through our endowment. And we actually launched an initiative this year to raise $500 million to help support students. I think that's going to be a critical element. We have not had a lot of pushback from parents, for example, complaining that their students' full tuition, their full fees are going to pay other students. I think there is actually a reasonably good spirit about this, the idea there is some redistribution. And I must say that I think everyone understands what we're doing and seems to support it. But again, as you increase the fees, it's becoming difficult for parents to cover the costs, and we'll have to come up with additional support from the institution.
Well, we've identified some of the causes of the financial stress. Why don't we talk a little bit about some solutions, so this isn't all about difficulties. One solution, Ann, is to educate even more students at community colleges because of the lower costs. And among other things, I know in Florida, and we were talking about this a little bit in the green room, there is a move to give community colleges the right to offer 4-year degrees. So share with us your perspective on that concept, and whether you think it is an idea whose time has indeed come. And there are some who would be concerned about mission creep, but clearly there seems to be some enthusiasm for looking at community colleges being providers of 4-year degrees.
I really think we're entering the golden age for community colleges. One, because we are expanding our mission, and two, because of what the Obama administration, the spotlight that is now focusing on community colleges. But with that said, I'll tell you, having come out of a community college, I've been one of the last holdouts to change our name, go 4-year, even as my staff has been pushing me, saying, this is where the new money is, this is where the need is in our community. And let's face it, part of this in Florida was money-based, because the new money was with the baccalaureate programs. It wasn't with doing what we'd been doing all along. So last year, the legislature abolished Florida's community college system. They renamed us the Florida College System. And so you saw the 28 community colleges, you saw many of them starting to change their names. And they are now known as Polk State College and Florida State College of Manatee and Sarasota counties. I mean, some of the names defy imagination. But we are a system in flux, and what we're hearing from students is, we want you to keep the open door, but we want to be a real college. So they want community out of our names, because They want to feel that they are part of, and I've, for years said we're the Rodney Dangerfield of education. We haven't gotten any respect as a community college. So you're seeing this movement, and I think it's going to, it's going to be nationwide with community colleges. Some will choose not to. Most will choose to go, at least change the name or go the 4-year. But I think the critical piece that I'm most fearful of is keeping the mission of that open door first 2-year education. I think that's critical. I think the need is to provide more baccalaureates for our communities, more relevant training for our communities. I've told our people we are only going to do a boutique of baccalaureate degrees because I have 20 baccalaureates from the University of Central Florida. And UCF has done something very wisely. They have put buildings on each of the community colleges in their region. So there is a university partnership center identified on all of those community college campuses where the students can go and get baccalaureates through UCF. But now students will also be able to get them through the community college, but they will be very specific, primarily career-focused degrees. So I think in 10 years, it's going to be a whole different system. And I'm not sure community will be in the middle of anybody's name 10 years from now. And I'm sad by that, and I'm also proud of that.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Jean, any solutions that you see to the state funding issues? You've suggested that it's not going to come back anytime soon, but is there anything we can be doing to change minds in Sacramento, or maybe minds in Washington, messages, tactics that we need to be focusing on to restore a sense of the public good? I know, you were talking about the fact that you're probably going to have to cut enrollments. Other institutions within the UC system and the Cal State system may be thinking similarly. Will the fact that you're cutting enrollments perhaps change people's perception of what's going on in a positive way, in that they'll see there are real impacts when you cut the state budget? Is there potentially an upside here?
Difficult, very, very difficult, and I'm uncertain about that. I think the best we can do, again, is to work hard to educate everyone about the role of university college educations in the economic welfare of our communities, and we have to, again, emphasize the role that we play in really creating jobs in our community by actually putting people into the environment that are with much higher skills than if we don't provide an education. And some of the areas where we can focus on is, first, the intellectual, beyond just the education of students, is an area of intellectual property transfer, the creation around the university of more activity that's directly tied to the university, so people can see intellectual property spin-offs that have actually created companies, for example, within Los Angeles. So again, and emphasize that. There are many companies that have been started that people don't realize it came right out of UCLA research labs. And I think we have to do a better job of making this link between educational institutions and the benefits that are provided. The most important benefit, of course, being graduates that are highly trained and ready to enter the workforce, but also even in terms of even physically activities that we do within our community that create wealth. So that's probably the only thing we can do is, again, just reinforce that relationship between educating people and the tremendous benefits to our community.
Mm-hmm. And Dick, how much hope should we be putting in the Obama administration to help deal with some of these issues? Certainly the rhetoric seems to be moving in the right direction. There are elements of the stimulus package that are certainly moving in the right direction, but it's important also, I think, to remind ourselves the stimulus package is a couple of years of funding, and then those huge deficits become probably the big driver of federal policy. So how much stock can we be put in Washington being the solution to what we're facing?
Well, you're asking somebody who's biased against Washington. I stayed with state government because I never felt that the federal government could quite get it right. But I am a strong admirer of the Obama administration. I learned last night from some CC alums that one of our graduates named Marcia McNutt, who used to run the Monterey Research Laboratory, was just named the head of USGS, U.S. Geological Survey, where she joins Jane Lubchenco, a CC alum, heads NOAA, the National Oceanographic and an atmospheric agency, and Ken Salazar, CC alum, who's Secretary of the Interior. So I should have a lot of confidence
Yeah,
in this
you should.
administration to do the
Extremely
right thing.
well-educated
if I can put them
people.
all in one room, maybe I could get some research money out of them or something. Look, I think that, as I said earlier, I think that the president's voice and his priorities and his recognition that education at every level, but higher education is critically important to our country's future, is important. I think that this initiative for community colleges is hugely important, particularly given where our economy is today. I'm not sure that we've envisioned what the next breakthrough in higher education that we in the United States author will be. And it may take recognizing just how totally challenged we are by the Chinese to challenge our imagination to move in that direction. Part of it certainly is to make articulation work. I mean, I'm smile at the notion of community colleges becoming four-year institutions, because then they're going to have the problems of four-year institutions, right? And we'll have to reinvent community colleges to go back to the access responsibility. Whereas if we had real articulation, the kind that UCLA practices and some other universities practice, but not enough. We get probably 4 or 5 young people from Pikes Peak Community College to come to CC each year. And they don't believe that it's an opportunity for them because they've never felt that they had the resources to do this. It actually costs them less to come to us than it did to Pikes Peak Community College, because we pay for everything. And they're great students. And we actually have an endowment for single parents, which we often don't find students to help us spend. So we're winners in a very small way, but in the larger sense, this issue of how the whole higher education system fits together may be a place where federal leadership and resources can be helpful. I don't know how many of you have seen the video called Shift Happens. I have to say it carefully. Shift Happens. Are you familiar with this? It's sort of Reichian, you know. I mean, I don't know what Bob talked about when he was with me, but this notion that the top 10 jobs of 2020 don't exist today is a powerful notion when you think about it. It's a challenge to what you do when you're trying to figure out what partnerships do you enter into as a community college, where do we put more resources in terms of curriculum, where we focus our research. But I think what we have to understand is we're educating these young people for a different world. And there isn't going to be a single skill that can serve them for a lifetime without tremendous re-education, retraining. And so I would like every diploma to sunset. I'd say, okay, you're going to get a diploma from us. It's going to sunset in 10 years, because you're going to have to, I don't care whether you're in the same discipline. What you think of as European history will be looked at differently 10 years from now. And certainly in thinking about circadian rhythms in biology or whatever, 10 years from now it's going to be hugely different, and at the community college it would be. But somehow to say to people, whatever investment you make in higher education has to be renewed. My knee's jerking each time I do that. It has to be renewed in order to sustain your own working life, your commitment to the community, and in order to help us as communities and as a nation be part of this tremendously interconnected global world. I mean, it's just going to be so different, and it changes so fast.
And Dick, you went to a place that I was going in my thinking as well a moment ago, and we've touched on this a number of times in talking about these challenges about we need to do, we need to think, we need to change, and I keep wondering who is the we, and I'm reminded of a British observer of American higher education saying the great thing about the American system of higher education is that it's not a system. And because it's not a system, and because it is built on diversity, and it is built on institutions, as you described, that have kind of popped up here and there over time, there is not necessarily then a coherence to policy, to articulation, to addressing these big picture issues as a total sector. And I think we resist that, and probably wisely, coming from Washington. On the other hand, I think we recognize the need for some coherence. Let me just, we're going to be running up on the end of our time here, and I do want the audience to have an opportunity to ask some questions, so please be thinking about those. But I want to turn our attention, I think an appropriate place to kind of conclude my questions is to look at what all this means for the work that these folks do. What's it mean for the advancement profession, for alumni relations, for fundraising, for communications and marketing? And I want to start with you and understand what it has meant for communications and marketing efforts at Seminole. When you're facing more students than you can handle, do you then say, and therefore one of the things we can save money on is marketing because we no longer need to market the institution. So has this new environment changed what you're doing in marketing, your investment in marketing, the mix of marketing vehicles that you use? Give us a sense of what the implication has been.
Well, I would be lying to you if I said it hasn't changed what we do in marketing, because if you've got 18% more students and 30% more students, you don't need to be running those ads. And it's funny, the focus groups we've done with students, they'll say, we love your television ads. Well, I'm not doing television ads, Valencia's doing television ads. So the students are just, know that it's education, it's a community college. So yeah, we made a huge cut in our marketing budget. I mean, we are still out there, we are still doing quality materials, but we're moving that money over into the grants area and into the foundation area, because we need to find a way to access more of the stimulus dollars that are coming down, whatever the Obama administration comes up with. We need more dollars coming into the institution. So that's really, when we talk about going back to core mission and looking at where we're placing the resources, that's a very conscious decision we made to beef up our grants office, to beef up our foundation office, and at the same time to take down the marketing office, with the caveat that when the enrollment starts falling off, when we do the name change, we're going to need to put more money back into marketing.
Very interesting. And Jean, how about alumni relations at UCLA? Are you changing events, cutting back on events, increasing emphasis on career services in light of employment issues, engaging alumni in advocacy efforts to help address what's going on in Sacramento? What's this causing to be different in your alumni efforts?
So I'd say all of those. I mean, I think we're probably trying to engage our alumni at a level of intensity that we've not before. We, like many public institutions, have relatively low rates of alumni giving to the institution. And we're reminding our alumni that, in fact, they received an education that was free. It changed their lives. And now they have a responsibility actually to help to change the lives of students that are there now. So actually enhanced engagement, certainly more paper plates. I mean, the events, we were saving money on events, but we are working very hard to reach what we have, something like 380,000 alumni, of which we are only in contact with a relatively small number, and reminding them, UCLA changed their lives, and they've got to change other lives. So that's the first thing. Second, in terms of our focus on philanthropy, I think we've asked ourselves, what's our core mission? And that should drive our philanthropy. And the core mission is educating students, and therefore increased emphasis on raising funds specifically for students. So as I mentioned, we launched an initiative just for students, graduate students and undergraduates. So it's shifted our emphasis a bit towards students, but it's also reminded us we've got to reach more alumni and try to bring them into the family.
Sounds like a smart move to me, and I think to a lot of folks in this room. And Dick, how about on the fundraising front? You're in the middle of a fundraising campaign, I think, and for those of you who haven't seen Steve Elder riding his unicycle on the campaign video, go to the website and check it out. He's riding a unicycle through the
He's waving his broken hand right now.
And exactly, you'll see that he's paid for it. But I have really a two-part question for you, Dick. Has the recession caused you to change your approach to the campaign in any way by altering the case, the time frame, the financial goal? And have you increased, decreased, or held steady the investment that you're making in your fundraising program? Because one of the things that we hear are instances where institutions appear to be cutting back their investment in fundraising, and frankly, we're very puzzled by that when that seems to be an increasingly important revenue stream.
John, I'm an old campaigner. I mean, I grew up with campaigns because I lived in the public arena for many years. And I felt at the beginning what we wanted to do was to create a campaign that never stopped. And so we didn't put a big investment, sort of big front-end investment in a kind of campaign overhead. And we've really tried to build the internal capability to sustain a campaign. We achieve that goal, we'll just set another goal and keep going. Steve knows this, and all of the folks involved know it. And as a consequence, we have not really cut back on that investment. Now, we need to constantly ask, is the vision, as we articulated for this campaign, one that is compelling in these circumstances? And so I would say the elements of the campaign that were capital-oriented are less front burner today, and the elements of the campaign that would either be budget relieving or financial aid are more front burner today. But we haven't really changed the vision. Mm-hmm. So if somebody came to me tomorrow and said, I'm prepared to write a check for $50 million to do what you need to do to the library, I would say, I'm delighted. But we're not going to be spending the time so much around how do we identify that person as how do we identify somebody who's going to give us $5 million for financial aid. The third, so I think the vision is sustained. I think there's a question as a practical matter so people don't burn out. Our target was 2010. I think we really need to push that target back a year or two. So maybe it's 2012. What's the big deal? The goal is the same. It's valid today as it was when we set it a number of years ago, but realistically, we're working in a different environment. So sustained team, strong leadership. I mean, Steve actually was on two wheels when he did that to his hand. Yeah. He's somewhat better on one wheel because then he's really paying attention to where he's riding his bike. So focused leadership, I guess, is the lesson out of this.
I do want to see if we have any questions from our audience. If we do, there are microphones, and we have one right here.
Just curious, and you touched on it a little bit, John, about advocacy and what each of your institutions is planning on spending to advocate to policymakers, not only in your state capitals, but also in Washington. We're talking about what we hope to see, but if you're not up there in front of these people talking to them about it almost constantly, as you well know, it ain't going to happen. So that's expensive. Now, how do you balance that versus what you think you're going to get in return? Thank you.
Who would like to jump in on that one? Gene?
Well, we have a pretty well-organized advocacy effort. A lot of it is actually fronted by alumni who speak for us, actually, and cover many of the expenses associated with chatting with the folks in Sacramento about all the important things the UC system and UCLA in particular is doing. So we certainly invest a fair amount in advocacy, but we also get an awful lot of contributions and free time of people who feel passionately about the institution.
One of the challenges we're facing in Florida is the rebranding of the system, since so many of us have changed our name and are going 4-year. I have the dubious job this next year of coordinating the efforts of the 28 community college presidents as we rebrand the system and do our legislative pitch. And I'll tell you right now, Miami-Dade, which is 180,000 students, wants to go with a very negative campaign. They have just laid off 110 people. They've just announced they're adopting the university model. They're closing off their enrollment. And they want to go very negative. My board chair is a legislator, and he's saying, you go negative, it will not serve you well. So this next year, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of a campaign we do come up with to please the 28, but hopefully it'll be very positive and really focus on what we're achieving with our students, because it's all about student success. It's got to come back to student success. And in terms of Washington, I just hired an extra lobbyist to work Washington for the stimulus money.
Governor?
Most of what we do is through consortial activity and advocacy. So at the state level, where there are only 3 more or less alike private institutions of higher education, we maintain one person who works Denver to try to understand it. Often it's the adverse impacts of decisions that get made that really have unintended impact on us. And in Washington, it's principally through the association, NICU. And we'll come in for an annual meeting, and we'll use that time to be advocates on our own behalf. Interestingly, for many of the private institutions of higher education, they're members of the boards of trustees who are in a position to be advocates. And I would certainly commend that to all of you to think about how you use alums strategically, as Gene has said, but members of boards of trustees who really should be well enough educated on the issues to be able to be effective, and they often have relationships with key decision makers.
Jim, we have you here. We have a question there, and then I think we'll wrap things up. Jim?
First, you're all wonderful advocates, great representatives of higher education, so I applaud you from those of us who are working under you in positions around the country. I don't think you probably want to give the sunset idea, though, to the alumni. It might inhibit their giving a little.
Yeah.
But seriously, aren't we in a big transition? Probably the most akin to World War II. If you think about it, most of the institutions were founded and funded, particularly in the eastern half of the United States where there are more privates, by religious organizations. And the religious organizations were a big piece of the funding of those institutions. I mean, even John Rockefeller's gift was, it was his Baptist minister who convinced him to create the University of Chicago. Right now, higher education's funding from the government is disappearing, or at least under enormous stress. I mean, you represent UCLA, outstanding research university. NIH funding is going to go up for 2 years, but we don't actually make any money on NIH funding. The secret is that we actually lose money every time we get a grant, right? So isn't this an addiction, and also a way to say that private philanthropy is by far the most reliable partner in this process? If it was originally religious organizations and the government, isn't it private philanthropy that has to take up the role? That's my
Marvelous question.
I start. Well, you know, private philanthropy is certainly the most fungible of all the sources that give you the most flexibility. And you're correct. I mean, research grants go to research, and that's what they do. They're certainly not usable, although they create capacity and they create opportunities for education of your students, which can't be underestimated. I mean, there's a tremendous benefit to the educational process involved in research, so it's well appreciated, and certainly the increases are making a difference. Increases in funding, but largely the institutional support that's going to be required to help students with their financial needs and to build programs is really going to have to come from philanthropy. So all of you in the room, we're looking to you, actually, to really make the difference for us.
And we have one last question over here.
John Miller, very proud UCLA alumnus. And I have a question for you, Chancellor Block. My perception is that the enormous effort is being put toward keeping undergraduate tuition levels low. The professional schools, the tuition lids have largely come off and are starting to rival those of the private institutions. And I've always felt as though the public universities have provided an avenue to the professions for people of all socioeconomic backgrounds that I fear is being lost. I understand the rationale is that the MBAs and the MDs and the JDs have higher income potential, which I think is only true if they go into certain aspects of those fields. Do you have evidence that shows that access to lower income, less wealthy people is in fact being preserved by the redistribution of those higher tuitions?
Yes, we do, and we watch that fairly carefully, and I think we were able to do that. I should also mention there are professional schools where fees have not gone up so dramatically, but the ones you mentioned certainly have had substantial increases. There's a tremendous emphasis in all those schools to put back put back fees to actually help support students that don't have the resources. So we're very sensitive to that, because that's one of the great dangers. On the other hand, we're realistic that professional schools will eventually, I think, become tubs on their own bottom at many institutions. It's going to be required, given the decreases in state support. So I'm certainly, you make a very, very important point, but we are mindful of it.
I just, as somebody who's not a UCLA alum, I want to speak to the value of the graduate schools there. We had a young woman from Southern California who came to CC and won, she was the top women's basketball player in Division III in the country, and just a fabulous student. I heard about her because a professor of constitutional law called me and said, "Do you know about this young woman named Melanie August? She just wrote the best paper in my con law class, and I understand she plays basketball." And I sent him an email back. I said, "Leif, if she wrote a paper that's half as good as the way she plays basketball, she's an outstanding." She was a top student, and she's going to be at your law school this coming year. And I guarantee you that you will hear from Melanie August, and she will support you when she is successful. She will be successful. Great student.
I want to wrap this up with getting totally away from talking about stress. In fact, on the contrary, anti-stress, and reminding ourselves a little bit of the life of the mind, which is really what we're all about. And instead of talking about the budget, I'd just very briefly like to ask each of you to recommend to us something for our summer reading. And Dick,
Can I start with me?
Yeah.
I have two recommendations. Don't eat too much antipasto. It's a wonderful cookbook by Tony Danza. And I'm serious. I read it in Hilton Head about a month ago, and I'm already using the recipes. Don't eat too much antipasto. And the other, and just one other thing, it's a book called The Back of the Napkin by Dan Rome. And it would be very handy to you. Actually, Steve Elder would be a natural at it. The subtitle is Solving Problems and Selling New Ideas with Pictures.
Great.
The Back of the Napkin, Dan Rome.
Great. Two very interesting recommendations. Ann?
And I'm actually in a book club, and the joke is the community college president never reads the book unless it's on audio tape. So I'm now in a Scrabble club. But Water for Elephants, just a wonderful escape and a wonderful read, particularly given our economic times, and it goes back to the Depression.
So I'm just about finished with a book by Steve Lopez, who is a LA Times reporter. It's called The Soloist, and it's about a homeless person in Los Angeles who is was a Juilliard student. Unfortunately, he's a schizophrenic, and he plays the violin and the cello in downtown LA on the streets, and it's sad and uplifting at the same time.
It's a movie now, too.
Yes. Wonderful recommendations. I hope you will all read all of those books. And now, if you would, please join me in thanking three wonderful panelists. I think if there is reason to be optimistic in these difficult times, it's that we have such enlightened leaders at the head of our institutions. So we greatly appreciate not only your being here, but what you do when you go back home. So thank you again. And now I will turn things over to my good friend, Mike Schoenfeld, to bring the 2009 Case Summit for Advancement Leaders to a close.
Good. Thank you very much, John. And please don't leave yet. We have just a little bit more to go. Chancellor Block, thank you. President Celeste, thank you. President McGee, thank you. And I just want to let you know, I'm at Duke University. If you want to reapply, we have a very robust need-based financial aid program that guarantees to meet the full financial need, demonstrated need. So if you want to come back, just give us a call. And John, thank you for leading a very, very thoughtful discussion. This was really a most interesting and provocative way to end a most interesting and provocative Summit. This does bring us to the close of the 4th Case Summit for Advancement Leaders. I want to thank each of you for your participation, for coming out here, for staying until the end, and for being very active and eager participants in this wonderful conversation. You know, yesterday our case now Chairman Emeritus, Julian, said so eloquently that what we do is build a solid foundation for the future. And that, of course, is why we're here. It is why we do what we do. It's not for the awards, although those are nice. It's not for the chicken dinners. I can't say those are necessarily nice, but we have to suffer through them. But because every call, every story, every event, every activity, every conference that we go to is really based on making it possible for us to continue and for the leaders of our institutions and for our faculty and for our students to make it possible for education and for discovery and for service and for, in our own way, in every place, changing the world and making it a better place. So let me say again thank you to my colleagues on the advisory committee, most of whom were here for the conference, our speakers, our moderators, our facilitators, our sponsors, and our exhibitors who made all of this possible. My colleagues at Duke for supporting me during this particular time, and especially to the Case staff who have really been wonderful to work with. The dirty little secret is that they made this about the easiest volunteer experience I think that anybody can have. We're especially interested in your feedback, and you should have been getting emails from Case to submit feedback for the program so that we can continue to make these summits and make these events as useful and as interesting as possible. So please be sure to respond to the email. It's just one more, and Case has made it very easy for you to do that. So before we wrap up and look ahead to next year's summit, we have 50,000 Hyatt Gold Passport points to give away to one lucky winner. The points can be exchanged for a number of free nights at participating Hyatt hotels, and you can get more information on the program, the Gold Passport program, at www.hyatt.com. And I have the bowl here. You have to be present to win, so I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. Karen Zamarippa. Is Karen here? She's gone. Okay, we're gonna pick up speed. Julie Seedhouse. Julie, all right. Congratulations. You have yourself 50,000 points. Of course, you'll have to give half of them back to your university, but that's okay. Again, I thank you. I invite you to look ahead and plan ahead for next year's summit in New York City. And to that end, I am very pleased to introduce to you the Vice President for University Advancement at Tufts University, Brian Lee, who will be your summit chair for next year. And Brian is a member of the Case Board of Trustees. And building on something I saw Cassie do yesterday, I am actually now going to rip off the ribbon and place the ceremonial conference chair ribbon for Brian.
Wow.
Congratulations, and thank you.
Mike, thank you very much. I am wanting to thank you and congratulate you on an extraordinary job. From the opening key session until this extraordinary gathering of distinguished and extraordinary leaders in higher education, I think this has been a first-rate program, and you're to be congratulated. I'll seek to emulate your example of excellence as we put together the program for next year in New York. I'd ask you all to put on your calendars July 18th through the 20th, when we'll gather at the Marriott Marquis in Times Square. It promises to be a wonderful opportunity. I've come to each of the summits. This is my 4th, and I'm looking forward to the 5th. I'm excited to play a role in shaping the agenda, but want to reach out to each of you and invite you to give me your thoughts, your feedback on the kinds of issues and the sessions and the speakers that you think would add value to the daily work that you do. I would also like to invite you to be in touch with me directly if you have any interest in serving on the committee, or if you have specific ideas or ways in which you think you can enrich the experience. So with that, I close and simply wish you safe travels. Thank you for participating and supporting this initiative, and I look forward to seeing you on Broadway in New York next July. Thank you very much.